of understanding the mind, but I find the internal family system that I'm going to present a little bit, it's probably the most integrative one with all the systems that are out there. And I love it because it has a wonderful overlap with Orthodoxy and Christianity in general. It has some really makes sense from a theological point of view. So the one thing, we should try to live in such a way that if the Gospels were lost, they could be rewritten by looking at us. And that goes back to our discussion last night, that it's the Gospel is one piece. There's so much more, but we are really bearing Christ, and we are the ones that are reliving the Gospel in today's present. And I look at counseling, I look at therapy, I look at spiritual direction as a way to really connect with Christ inward, that indeed the kingdom of God is within us. So it's outward, but it's also inward. And for me, that's a lifelong pursuit to help people in that way. And I have this quote, and I was thinking maybe we can take turns and three people can just read it.
But now indeed there are many members, yet one body, and the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again head to the feet, I have no need of you. No, much rather, those members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary.
And those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, on these we bestow greater honor, and our unpresentable parts have greater modesty, but our presentable parts have no need.
But God composed the body, having given greater honor to that part which lacks it, that there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care for one another. And if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. Or if one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it.
Now, the shift that I want to do, I mean, I'm always, when we think of our body, obviously we think of our community, but I also want us to think in terms of our inner system, in terms of thoughts and feelings and different states of consciousness that we have. So I'm going to open with that invitation. And from a psychological system, it has been my experience that yes, we desire unity, and that's being one with God. And we are, our church is very well telling us about the process of theosis and how we're transforming ourselves and becoming one with God in the process of sanctification. But the reality is internally, actually, we are fragmented, because if we just think about it and we pause, we have many states of consciousness internally. We have feelings, we have thoughts, belief, aspects of ourselves. In this particular model, they use the word parts, but I'm not thinking of like a different personality. It's just sides of us. And what happens is sometimes we get in inner wars. Anyone experience that? Like, oh, I should do this. No, I shouldn't do that. And we go in a back and forth. That's our different states of consciousness that we experience as fragmentation. So the question is, how can we achieve oneness internally? I mean, obviously the church is prescribing a lot of things for us to do through prayer, through work in our community, but there's also work that we can do internally. And I always think of the desert fathers, right? When they went into the desert and kind of have those conversations with themselves and really with God, they were wrestling internally. They removed everything externally, because that's usually the hardest part. Oh, but he did that, or she said that. But when you're in a desert, there's not much to do. It's all internally. So they were doing some of this work, and it's fascinating to me that they already have that sense that that work is needed. And my question will be also, how can help our children do the same? So if I look in terms of parts and state of consciousness, one visual way to think about it, think of these bubbles, okay? And internally, I have these different states. Think of when we're angry, right? We react differently. All of a sudden, our blood pressure goes up. We might become red or why not. Our voice goes up. Or if we're fearful, it's a different state of consciousness, right? But in the center, there's this image of God. Psychologists in this model, they call it a true self. But from my point of view, it's the image of God that it's within us. So many times it's clouded, right? But how it says in the gospel, when the veil is removed, then we get in touch to that deeper sense of self. And through the work that I do, I help people get in touch with those parts and really reconnect to that image of God in a way that they can relax. And they're not going to always take our state of consciousness seat, so to speak. So it becomes more like this. In our consciousness, there's a system, right? We have different layers to it. Another way to visualize is, okay, this is the self, the image of God in the center. We are not aware of everything that's happening to us. That's why we need community. We're not aware of all of it. On the top, imagine our consciousness, what we're aware. Okay, right now I'm in the presenter mode. I have to be aware of my posture, what I'm doing, what I'm saying. There's a lot of things that are happening underneath. They might be quiet or relaxed, or they might be up, depending on the situation, but they're dormant, usually. And sometimes pop in. Okay, I may be hungry. Okay, so that might pop into my consciousness. I'm not going to say it out loud. I'm not hungry, by the way, right now, but it could happen, right? As a teacher, you're like, okay, I have to go to the bathroom. I can't. I'm in the middle of the class, right? I will wait, but that's in the back of my consciousness, and I'll take it. I'm kind of like, okay, I'll do it. Wait 20 minutes, I'll go. That kind of thing. But in the center, when we're peaceful, and sometimes that happens for people when we're doing something that we really love. You know, so other psychologists use the term flow. I don't know if you ever heard of this. Where we're in the flow, or when we are in church, we're praying, or a beautiful moment in nature, or looking at our little kids and they're just wonderful. We have that peace, that centeredness. Some people call it spacious heart. I would say from our tradition is the image of God. We just get centered. There's no push, no pull, no pressure. We're just there in the presence of God. And I love it how in our church was emphasis not on just hearing or seeing, it's all the senses, because somehow we get centered and we have this understanding that we're in the presence of God. We're not just knowing God. And in this place, there's peace, there's joy, there's connectedness, compassion, creativity, clarity, courage, curiosity, charity, love. There's all of them there naturally. And when the parts are coming, and let's say I'm angry, it's not like this disappears. God is still there, but it's the veil that kind of covers it, and I'm not necessarily in touch with it. Depending on the external conditions, right, I might have, this is what I said earlier, the living room of our consciousness, as underneath could be conscious or subconscious or different aspects and parts of us. And what I want to do and present really quickly is different parts that I think we're all seeing and are kind of familiar. Maybe we haven't named that as parts of us, but it's instinctively they're true. For example, if a baby's crying, right, all of a sudden like, at least my mom part will be like, take care, and part will pop up, right? And I might be really like reading or doing something else, and if I see a baby, my face lights up and I'm right there. Or if the baby's crying, we could have any of those reactions. I could be like, oh no, not again, it's midnight, I want to go back to sleep, or caring, or fearful. Is my baby okay, right? Depending on the situation. We'll do an exercise where we can all look at us. So I'll start, because it's always nicer, kind of decrease the pressure. So I have this life-saving part. I like to help people. I like to do, therapy, medication, my family, kids, home, everything, right? I even have a teddy bear right here in case it's needed, obviously, psychological. And I like that. I like to problem solve. And for today's presentation, okay, I had my books, I prepared, I got ready. That's a different part of me. But of course, Friday, yesterday, you're all here relaxing. I was going like this. Oh my goodness, the dishes, the clothes, the presentation, phone calls, I made that. But finally, I made it, but at the end, I was like a little tired. And then lo and behold, I have a part, they say, remember the presentation, you got to finish it, right? Got to do it. That thought came in, so far I finished the presentation. And I had a part of me that was like, I wish I'm at St. Methodius right now and just enjoy and do nothing, right? There was all part of me. And this part, I have to be careful because sometimes it does too much. I can go from morning till night, and if that happens, and I did that, I burned myself as a psychiatrist, and I quit actually practicing, and I did just teaching for a few years because I ended up like this. If we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're constantly on, this could happen, and it happened to me. And then, of course, there was a part of me that got sad about it. So with that, I just want to give you some examples, but let's talk about how does this inner system work. In families, we always have roles, and we kind of think, oh, this person is doing that, this person is doing that. That's internally as well true. Like we have parts that have certain roles. But the idea to remember, there are two types of parts And we don't always layer it that way. Exile is parts that we don't like in our state of consciousness. And we're kind of pushing it, shoving them down. It could be emotion hurts, could be sadness, could be guilt, could be shame, whatever. Sometimes some Christian families, anger is not an allowed emotion because it's kind of labeled bad because it leads to a bad behavior. But the emotion itself is just an emotion, right? It's triggering our amygdala. We're born that way. But somehow we're exiling different emotions. And we have what's called protectors. We're much more in touch with protectors. Those are reactions that somehow jump right in to help us and kind of put the exiles at bay, away. Okay, psh, quiet. Nothing is wrong. Everything is going well. And I'll give you some examples of exiling protectors. What's interesting in this model is that there's this assumption, which is different though, that every reaction has an initial good intention when it was formed. And it could be when we're 20, it could be when we're 10 or 5 or 2, depending on our history. But initially, it's caught up in some wheels, culturally reinforced or whatever has happened in our family, and they're stuck in some roles. But this is, we have to always remember, the original function from God. And I love what we were talking yesterday, like if someone has alcoholism, there's actually a deep, deep desire to connect with God. And somehow that got twisted, and that part that figured out, oh, there's a substance that can help me, kind of had an original good intention to help, but somehow got caught up and cannot get out of this bad role. So those protectors, many times, all the parts can bring joy to the system or remove an unpleasant feeling, protect us from hurt, and it's possible that they can get stuck in their roles. So it's really a different way to thinking. I even had people that have self-injurious behavior. They cut themselves. And all they hear, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. But when you really sit down with that part, it's actually trying to help and remove the a lot of anxiety or shame. And once they get that and the shame is addressed or the hurt, there's no need to cut anymore. And that part is free to do other things. So I'll show you some pictures. I love the pictures. They're kind of funny, but it brings down our point. So what are some of instinctive, soft, exiled parts? And it could be anything. I'm just showing a few. So it could be, okay, a love me part, the need to be loved, the need to be connected. That could be exiled. Sadness sometimes could be exiled. Or fearful part. Sometimes their feelings are so exiled they never see light, but they're kind of there, kind of lurking and looking for something. And the protective parts, there's no end to that. There's so many layers. And interestingly, I put a picture on the background of a potential exile. Not that this is the only choice. For example, not just fear can make us be Superman and just do that. But it could be other feelings as well. But just to kind of keep remembering that whenever we see something on the forefront, there's actually probably an exile feeling that kind of triggers it. And that's important to think with our kids, because what we are talking last night, and Father Anthony mentioned that it's not about the behavior. What's the cause of it? I want us to look in the background and say, wait a second, if my child is doing this, or if I'm doing this behavior that I don't like, if the child is texting all the time, what could be the exile behind it? Okay, and instead of just addressing the behavior, think backwards. So we could be critical, judging, and we all have usually a self-judging part, and I found the more someone has gone through school, the more self-judging that happens, because you have to do this, you have to do that, you learn so many things. But that could be also an exile. So there are two layers with each pictures. One is realizing that there could be an inner feeling that's hidden, and the second, this in itself is not bad. Any of those pictures that you see, they're not bad. It's just when they get into very excessive roles, then they could bring a cost. Okay, we need sometimes to evaluate ourselves. We need to evaluate others. This is an important part. But when it's extreme, it can bring a problem. Listen to me part. We need that. But this could become a problem sometimes. Manager, being in charge, I might be having this part because internally I feel weak or low self-esteem. And then before I know it, I'm portraying that. But that might not be the case. That in itself is not bad, right? It could be that I'm really tough. It was fascinating for me to work when I worked in prison for a few months, even the toughest of the toughest of the toughest criminal that had those armors, they were talking and you can really connect. You could see something like this, a hurt inside, something really soft that was hurt so badly that it needed the armor. Otherwise, it couldn't. And if you're working with kids in inner city, they need that. Otherwise, they might get killed. Multitasking part, I mean, again, we need this. It was very helpful for me yesterday. But if I do it too much, then it could be as a response to an exile. Fighting, of course, we need to fight sometimes. But sometimes it could be in relationship to an exile. The same, I'm out of here. Or it could be a pleasing part. Of course, we want our kids to have this part, right? Don't we? And we love it too. I love it when my husband is showing this part. But when it's done, when it's needed and it's appropriate, it's great. But when someone is pleasing, even, and this is when we see, for example, in relationships, when they get into, women who might be, or men, it might be an abusive situation and they can't get out of it because you're constantly going back to this pleasing because you're afraid or sad or something else. Angry part. Again, we need to be, anger is an important feeling, but can we tame it? Can it help us as opposed to just overtake us? And sometimes it overtakes us when we're not listening to it. Some reactions are really, really fast. We could be the rebel or hypersexual or drinking too much. Those on themselves they don't necessarily have bad, and they have a function. They protect the exiles, and they come really fast. Cutting would be another example. Dissociating, it's another example like that. Obviously, we all need to eat, but if we eat too much, then we have the happy pig part. Or I like the Lenten version. We got to keep with no meat. And that happens, right? How many of us in the Lent, we're not eating meat, but then we end up eating crackers and this and this and that, right? Something needs to be filled. So what's the dynamic now between exiles and protectors? I want to show really quickly. Remember, good intentions. The original seed from God is good. We're in His image. Even those parts are in God's image, but somehow they can get stuck into those roles. So it's important to remember that. And I put back the verse, not that we have to read it, but to think of those parts of our bodies and our parts in our community, even the parts that we don't like about ourselves, are somehow trying to help us, as weird as it sounds. And it doesn't have to be full on or exiled and not be aware of it, push it completely. There is actually a third way, and that is through the true self, through Christ. There is a third way where we can connect with them and they don't have to overreact that much. For example, the difficult feelings, the ultimately deepest longing is for God. But sometimes we don't know that, and it takes time. But we might have protectors coming up, and we just saw all those pictures before, right? Or the same kind of exile, we can have different reactions. And I love this one because this runner signifies this part in ourselves when we just push through, no matter how hard and how difficult it is, we push through, which is wonderful. It helps us. But if it's done because of an internal reason, like if it's protecting from an exile, that's something to look at. Society loves workaholics, right? We love to be at work and whatnot. But when it's done that way compulsively, it's usually because there's an exile feeling. There's something else that needs to be addressed. One thing that I wanted to bring today using this model is how do we understand this in our relationship with our family? And we can say child-parent, you can think of also couple, husband and wife, like how does this interact and bring something to our awareness. And I'll give an example and then I'll show you how to think through this. So for example, a teenage kid always on the phone, always on the computer, only that, and we're like, come on. We're trying to help them not to be so much connected and always distracted. Parent might come and say, you have to do this, don't do this, give a little lecture. All right, well, the kid might get it, or the kid might say, no, I don't care about this, just go. And they go to their room, right? That's a reaction. So those are the parts of the kid, the parts of the grown-up. And then the parent might get really angry, right? And then before we know it, we're stuck. What I like about this letter, that in this model, this thinking is it's a Z, so it doesn't go anywhere. So we kind of get stuck in this. And what's really interesting, this is where we might go and ask for help because we just don't know what to do. And a couple is the same, right? I mean, it's normal. We have parts interacting, and before we know it, we get into this part. And what's interesting is that all the interaction then, if it's repetitive and if it happens months after month after month, it's going to be repetitive and get stuck, and it's going to miss what potentially exile could be. Maybe the kid is actually lonely. Maybe he's ostracized at school. Maybe something has happened, and that's the only way to get connected. And kids at this age, just to keep with that example, they have this underlining conclusion. If I don't answer a text within 2 seconds, my friends are going to ostracize me somehow. They're going to cut me off. So there could be that fear. And from a parent, could be that behind it, it's our fear, oh my goodness, is my child going to be okay? Is he going to make it? Right? So what's really not discussed and put on the table are those exiles. Those feelings, they're really hurt. So if we get into this circle, that's the take-home message, that sometimes all we're doing is interact at the protector levels, the reactive levels, as opposed to what's behind it? What's behind it in me, and what's behind it to my child, and can I help my child or the other to really be vulnerable, and I can really help? Because if this is taken care of, the protectors are not that needed, right? If a child really feels loved and understand and connects, you might not need to be on Facebook all the time. And I'm not saying this is the only explanation. I'm just giving some examples. Does that make sense? Where really the discussion should be at the exile level, the cause, the source of it. What is it that you're actually seeking? What is it that you need? And I love it, even Christ we talked about this last time, and I think it was Aaron who said, yeah, Christ always, when he interacted with someone, he didn't come and say, give a solution. He just asked, what do you seek? What do you need? He was going to that deeper need, so then it can really help them. A year has 365 days, and let's say someone lived for 10 years, or someone lived for 50 years. Can you imagine the amount of experiences we've encountered? Invariably, we're going to be hurt somehow. Invariably, we're going to develop some protectors. Invariably, we might get stuck inside in our system. So it's just natural that we all have many times many parts and many reactions. And the goal sometimes we think, oh, if I can just suppress it, let's say someone is overeating, right? If I'm overeating, if I can just suppress it, well, it works for a while. But then before you know it, now I'm exiling something new. Before you know it, that's going to pop up. Why? Because his thinking is protecting something. So unless I get to the cause, like what is it that's really protecting, right? There's no coincidence there is people are saying, oh, I'm emotional eating, right? Because many people, we're aware if we're eating because we're sad or anxious or whatnot. Well, that's the cause. That's what needs to be addressed and really taken care of. The peace of God which surpasses all understanding will keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. The true self, or the image of God, or the will of God, however we want to call it, is the best place to be and is the best place to interact with others. It doesn't mean that we're saying to our parts, oh, okay, bye-bye, just go the other room. They're going to help. They actually help us in many, many, many ways. But there's that witnessing internally. See, when I think of Holy Spirit, the witnessing, that is in there. If we just pay attention, there's someone witnessing. That's us witnessing what's happening. There's always there. The more we're aware, and actually research in psychology show that we have what's called dual mind. We have this ability to do one thing and to do two things in the same time. And we can use it in a good way. Think about when we're driving, right? We're not always, when we think of driving, but we can also have a conversation. Well, that's a duality right there. Right? But we can do it. It's even deeper. That witnessing of observing what's happening internally, that's the true self. That's when we can get in touch with the image of God. Talking about saying the prayer of the heart all the time, they don't do just that. They still talk, they still go to church, they still chant, they still eat. But they can do that in the same time because it's a much more deeper structure. in a way. And that when we're connected with the breath, it can happen automatically. There's that ability, but it's there. It's very, it's much deeper than we usually think. Whatever it's a protector, right? This is the Z that we're talking about. Imagine two people interacting, right? If actually the exile is the hurt, we can understand the hurt in the other person, and that can connect with their true self, and we can also connect, then the interaction looks totally different. So the question is, and I'm going to skip this, I have an, okay, what if a child is perfectionistic or someone is perfectionistic? And then we've talked about getting overburdened. Again, if those parts, we understand why are we taking the world? Why are we overburdening ourselves? What's behind it? And we're releasing that and connecting with Christ, with the true self, this can actually relax and unloads and heals. I really like this quote because in this process, in a way, we can acquire a sense of peace when we get deeper and we connect, have each part connects with our truest, deeper self, sense of self. And then other people will notice that. We've been in the presence of people and you look at them, they're like, some of the monks and nuns, they're holy. There's something about their interaction because they are in touch with that. So how can we help our children? And this is where we're going to continue tonight. So I'm just going to quickly flesh it out. Obviously, the best place to be is when we are in our true self. And it's better to be proactive than reactive. So we can teach some of those skills to our kids and cultivate that self-image for the kids. And remember, they have also the image of God inside. So how can we activate that? So we don't have to be always us working towards that. Because I planted Apollo's water, but God gave the increase. And it's in there as them as well. So those are the practical suggestions we're going to talk about it. Family rhythms and rituals, spiritual practices. And what I want to suggest, and I've mentioned this before in our previous camps, is heart-to-heart time with your kids. Make it a habit every week to spend some time. And then you can connect. Then I made that as a rule. I'm not going to be reactive. I'm not going to be any protector. I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to say, how dare you do that? My worries are not going to go up. I'm just going to be there, just loving and hearing. And one way to do it is to set aside, 30 minutes, 1 hour, if you can, weekly. Obviously, the more children we have, it's more and more difficult, but make it a sacred space that you can be open and safe. You're in your true self, and you can model that for the kids. And then there's no push, no pull, not overreacting, and you awaken that in the child, because once their protectors are down, they can relax. And because there's no reaction from us, we don't get into the Z in that time. And then I would tell my kids, okay, you can tell me anything. I won't get mad. I won't get angry. But in our space, right? Afterwards, if I would tell me that and you're disrespectful, okay, there are consequences for that. But in that space, I'm not worried about that. I want to just really be with your heart. And we're not focus on correction or lecturing. We just listen and try to understand, and helps them calm down and get to the cause. What's their hurt and how can I help that? And you model compassion. So we can talk about this, how the difference between middle school and high school, we can talk about that. But I just want to finish with this quote I love. There's a crack in everything. That's how light gets in. So we're imperfect, and God is making us perfect through his light. Thank you.